I was terrified. This was not only my first summer alone, my first plane ride alone, but really, my first time being alone. As a child, I had severe worrying problems. Most people thought it was almost comical, the way I would repeatedly check if all doors were closed and locked, and if the alarm was on. From a young age, I had been terrified of being by myself, and taken, which I guess is common for most. However, I feel I took this worry a tad too far. I had forced my parents to purchase me a 5-button phone at the age of 6, due to my fear of being left somewhere. Therefore, I would have some communication mechanism if I was in trouble. Now back to my story. I was shaking. I would be flying alone to Maine to spend 4 weeks at a sports summer camp with no technology allowed. Now, the technology part was not much of a concern, but spending 4 weeks away from my parents to be with just random kids I had never met before, in a bunk, really freaked me out. That's right, my parents wanted me to meet new people from all over the world. They felt it would be good for me. However, at 9 years old, going to a different state, knowing no one, was quite difficult. I trembled and shook while walking up to the security gate. And yes, sadly, I forced my mom to buy a ticket on the plane. As I boarded the plane, in which other kids from my camp were on, my mom demanded I use Purell as soon as I touched the back of the seat. I quickly regretted my decision. The plane ride there wasn't terrible. It was only an hour, but it seemed to me that everyone on my flight wasn't like me, and didn't want to be my friend. I felt alone and unwanted, like there were already a bunch of cliques and friend groups, and I was not welcome into joining any of them. As I got off the plane, my mom decided it would be fun for her to scream out, "Goodbye, Jonathan, I love you." I fled, and figured, oh great, now I'm a mommy's boy who uses a Purell. The bus ride to camp was one of the main reasons I was so quick to judge Camp Manito. I sat on a school bus alone, for 2.5 hours, with no one to talk to, while everyone else was talking about camp and college league and how excited they were to be back. My eyes started to water. How was I going to survive here for 4 weeks? When I arrived at camp, everyone was hugging and high-fiving, almost like a fraternity that I was definitely not a part of. Walking to my bunk, I noticed the camp's lake. It was beautiful, one of the coolest sights and best I had ever seen. But I was confused. It was such a nice day, and no one was in it. It was empty. It kind of reminded me of how I felt at this place, empty and alone. Depressing, right? When I arrived at my bunk, all the kids were strange, very strange. One kid named Jerome introduced himself to me by saying, "Hi, do you like to read? I love to read, especially for fun." I was disgusted. My counselors weren't much better. They were new and were as clueless about the place as I was. After I had been introduced and shown around the entire camp, which did look awesome, all the campers had free play. I decided to go to Alumni Hall, which was our indoor gym. At the time, I loved basketball. Therefore, I decided to play knockout with all the older kids. The kid in front of me was about 6'4", and never missed a shot. It was one of the last rounds of the game, and most of the kids were really impressed that I made it so far. The tall boy in front of me, Gabe, shot and missed, his first miss of the night. And shortly after I made my shot and got him out, I went on to win the knockout game. People started calling me Lil Kobe. I loved it. People started to know me. My eyes lit up and I smiled. I finally felt welcome. Now I forgot to mention that during this time I was going through a flat hat phase. Therefore, people recognized Lil Kobe as the kid who never took off his 5950 Toronto Blue Jays hat, with the sticker still left on it. The next morning, I walked by the lake. It wasn't so empty anymore. Some kids were in it, playing and having fun. From that point on, Camp Manito started to feel like home. I was starting to get the hang of things. Most of the camp knew Lil Kobe, and I made sure to branch out from my bunk and hang out and meet other kids from my age group that were more like me, who were in different bunks. I met twins named Ryan and Brandon, and their two best friends, Dylan and Spencer. We got along great, and I figured out that they lived in Potomac and Bethesda, which is only an hour away from where I lived. I even made the U11 basketball intercamp team. I played 2 years up. I became friends with a bunch of older kids too. With 2 weeks gone and only 2 left, I never wanted to leave this place. However, it was 2009, or Swine 09 as my camp called it. Yes, sadly, swine flu was going around, and kids from my camp had it, including myself. There was a group of us who had the flu. We all stayed in the rec hall, the old gym, until there were so many of us, they moved us to Alumni Hall. As I walked to Alumni Hall, I passed the lake. It looked empty and cold. Each night in Alumni Hall, there was a stupid fly, who always seemed to get near my cot, and loved to fly around in my ear. I was furious. Every other day or so, the kids would be allowed to make a phone call home. One of my phone calls home consisted of crying and screaming, where I claimed I would pay my parents $1 billion if they would get me out of this stupid place. It was awful. And even worse, at the time, I didn't know how to swallow a pill, so I was having liquid antibiotics, also known as drinking poison. Well, I stayed patient, and 7 days later, I was allowed to leave. I was afraid people might have forgotten about me, but as soon as I got out, a fellow camper said to me, "Hey, feeling any better?" While walking back to my bunk, I noticed the lake, as full as I had ever seen it, with everyone laughing, swimming, and having fun.